When there's a new editor in chief or any kind of large scale leadership change in comics at the publisher level, what does that do to the people underneath? Does that change out the creators? Do we see a big, massive shift in who's working for who? It's an important question since Dan DiDio was just removed from DC, and you've seen other shifts over the years. I mean, dating back from Jim Shooter's rise and removal, Axel Alonso and how he came went, and I mean, this happens all the time. So, what really happens to the company underneath it? That's what we're going to get into. Everybody, this is Perch. I get this question a lot about, hey, if there's problems with a company, if a publisher is a problem, whatever that means, kind of air quotes, a problem, then how do you fix that problem? And generally, people go with well, it starts at the top, which is more or less a true statement. It does start at the top, but it's not that simple. It's not as simple as saying, well, you remove one person and suddenly then the whole company, the culture changes, everything gets reformatted, and life is different. It's not as simple as just removing a key figure, but it is the first step generally in that process. So at any company, and this is true with comics, any industry, cultures are what drives the heartbeat and the life of the company. In this case, the publisher or the software company or the hospital or whatever it happens to be. It's why you have all these books written about corporate culture and what it means and how to lead it and how to dictate. And there's a lot of theories around this. There's a lot of kind of analysis, in particular in the last 10 years, a lot of blog entries about how corporate culture starts from below. It starts from the workers, and then it permeates up. It's kind of the trickle up effect. And there's some truth to that, certainly, that small cultural changes, changes in tools or options. If you're in software, a lot of companies started using Slack. Slack is a communication system. You probably have heard of it. And the way that product really kind of rolled out in big companies was different from how traditionally software rolls out in large corporations. Stuff like Cisco products, WebEx, if you've heard of these things, those tend to be mandated top down. Cisco would go to, say, a giant company, let's say Costco, and they'd say, you should use WebEx, and then they sell basically the management on this, and then management dictates it downward. But what happened with Slack was the opposite. Slack, and to some extent products like Zoom, they come from the bottom up. They're designed as kind of almost Trojan horses. They come in as very small things. Teams use them, usually in secrecy to the rest of the organization, and then eventually they broaden up and they build out. From a business perspective, this is kind of the sneaky way of getting a big contract, because once your employees are using something and it's sticky, they don't want to get rid of it. Why is this relevant to comics? Well, we see a culture kind of move up and down both directions. Certainly, the editor-in-chief or the people in charge, the VP of creative, whatever it happens to be, they're going to dictate a big part of the culture going down. So when Dan DiDio leaves, there's a ripple effect of certainly people that were loyal to Dan DiDio or maybe had their jobs because of him, or maybe shouldn't have had their jobs because of him. And here is where I just want to be careful, because in anyone's opinion, people can be worthy or not worthy of their jobs, and it varies for all kinds of different people. It's usually black and white. It's usually not black and white. It's usually not binary. People who have their jobs, there's some people who like them, some people who dislike them, and so this idea of nepotism is a weird one, because you can look at it and you can, in any given day, decide that this hiring decision is nepotistic and that's awful, or this hiring decision is great because somebody reached out to their own network. It's not one or the other. When DC Comics solicited Brian Michael Bendis, part of the value there was that Bendis was going to bring over his network. He was going to bring over established, that's kind of the key word, comic writers, people who are used to delivering at a big scale for a publisher. He was going to have artists and creators who are used to working in those pressures, and it was basically a talent raid done through an acquisition. So when a person is hired, either coming in or going out, there's a group of people within their network that are going to come in or out with them. Definitely in the DC of the future, there's going to be people who, didn't get along with Dan DiDio who are now potentially going to be empowered. There's people who were, seen as the right hand man or a key player for DiDio that are going to, potentially lose their jobs or want to leave because their safety net is now gone. Um, when Jim Shooter left, there was a handful of people who left. There was a handful of people who were in severe opposition for him that got a little bit more power. The interesting thing, though, about a company is typically speaking, these things calibrate quickly over time. And what I mean by that is, even if there's a lot of initial movement of kind of loyalists who quit or leave or are fired, some new people who are brought in who then bring in their buddies, over a fairly short period of time, that all balances out into a new normal. It's not as dramatic as what you might see on TV or in movies where kind of these big cliques get into power and immediately start wrecking things. They tend to come in, they tend to stabilize, it tends to normalize, and then life bumps along for a while until the person who was brought in new falls on the wrong side of people, and then they're removed. It's a circle of life. The other but the other part of the culture is what happens down below. So sometimes you get, and you saw this really play out with Axel Alonso, his strategy at the company. He was replaced by CB Cebulski, but Alonso was definitely fostered a certain creative type, a certain talent group. And he was doing it not because, for nefarious kind of evil reasons. He was doing it because he believed that was the best way to accomplish things. And some of the people that he brought in definitely kind of ran with that strategy, and they changed some things at Marvel. If you look at how Marvel Comics, I mean, even something as innocuous as there was a period of time where when they would introduce characters into the comic book, and I just covered this during an Avengers video I did around Mighty Avengers, you had Al Ewing come in and put things like, Blue Marvel, he's the toughest, also neurotic, or whatever. That's not a good, but they put these little sometimes irreverent, jokey kind of statements underneath the character name. This is how they introduced characters into the mix. Matt Fraction did this a bunch with X-Men as well. It was kind of a Joss Whedon-y approach to doing things, and it felt unique, and so it spread very, very rapidly. Now, having talked to a lot of people within Marvel, this wasn't a big editorial mandate. It wasn't Axel Alonso saying, hey, this is how we're going to do introductions to characters. It wasn't even something that was done at the writers' summit where you had this kind of big agreement in the room that this is how we're going to do things. What happened was a couple writers tried it out. It felt kind of stylistic. They brought it to some of their buddies at the writer level, and they did it too. And then it grew, and pretty soon it became a standard at Marvel for a few years before, these people started to back off of it. They're like, well, wait a minute, this is kind of dumb. The last time I remember seeing this was in Kelly Thompson's West Coast Avengers book. And then mercifully, it seems like that thing has gone away because it was never that great an idea in the first place, and it definitely got drove into the ground. But this is an idea of a cultural change or a change within the company that happens bottom up and versus changes that happen top down. An example of a top down change would be when CB Cebulski did come in, he cut a number of books that were lower selling and kind of did a restart reboot of some of these franchises and some of these comics. And that had a ripple effect, and that had people reacting to it. You see people like Donny Cates, who got more of a role within Marvel. Jason Aaron got a little bit of a higher profile. Aaron was already doing just fine under Axel Alonso, but you saw him kind of moved into a pole position. He was probably heading that anyway. Donny Cates was emerging into Marvel and has really been given a lot of leeway and ground. You see transitions of Scotty Young to writing. I mean, you see all these kinds of moments whenever things change. Over at DC, we see Dan DiDio has been removed, and now we're seeing kind of the slow ripple effect. Scott Snyder seems to have gotten a little bit more power out of the mix. We got the Death Metal was redone with more tie-in books. Generation 5 seems to have been downplayed a little bit. We're just seeing some differences in how these publishing strategies take place, and undoubtedly, when power leaves, it creates a vacuum. That vacuum is filled by somebody, and that somebody we'll find out who that somebody is going to be. It's a little bit early to tell who exactly that's going to fill that void over at DC, but it's there's no doubt about it that void is going to be filled. So, I mean, in general, a lot of things kind of happen. A lot of things change over time, and it's normal. I think we sometimes as fans get too hung up in this person's coming in, this person is leaving. What does it mean for comics? What does this mean to me? You know, are my characters going to change? Does this mean somebody I really hated is now fired, and so things are going to run amok? I mean, remember when CB Cebulski came in, and there's all these videos about the salvation of Marvel, and CB Cebulski is a fan of, he's a fan, he's a fan's fan, and he's the Axel Alonso time is done, and then very shortly after he canceled a lot of lower selling books like America Chavez and the Hawkeye book and other things. It was like, haha, people said this clearly it's Marvel getting back to basics, it's Marvel getting back to their core superhero books, and this is a bold new era that and finally. And then within 6 months, it's like, well, okay, some changes were made, the line was adjusted, a lot of those same people are still there. Maybe things aren't as different as we thought they were going to be, and life trundles on. That's why it's always good to approach these things with a little bit of caution, a little bit of skepticism. But what do you think? Is there something, someone, um, some character, some moment that you would like to see, you would like to be handled through a cultural shift or a management shift? Leave me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the matter. Otherwise, like, subscribe, introduce to a friend. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, or same thing on Facebook. Thanks for listening.